So today we're going to hear from Richard Barnes from King's, who's going to take us through bare land, EFAs and agri-environment. We'll then move on to Belinda from Syngenta, who will talk us through environmental seed mix offers. As you'll see, the timings are quite short. This is our first time doing a Zoom meeting, and maybe some of your first times as well. So we'll keep it quite short and have plenty of time for questions at the end, should you wish. So without further ado, I will hand over to Richard.
Thank you, Jen. Good afternoon, everybody. And for those of you who can see me, I'm actually sat in my car. I'm not driving, but I thought the car was the quietest and safest environment to do this with the joys of home working. So thank you, Jen. So I'm just going to ask Jen just to move through the slides. So thank you, Jen. We'll move on. Thank you. So basically this afternoon, I just want to give you a whistle-stop tour of two key areas. The first being addressing bare land and waterlogged soil, a very topical area given the winter weather we've had. Spring drilling progressing very nicely for a lot of people, but several of you I'm sure are coming across areas that won't get drilled or parcels of land that need some attention. So I'll focus on that first, and then we'll just move into some background regarding where we are with BPS and countryside stewardship and ELMs. So hopefully that will give us a bit of a flavour of where we're at. So first step, really looking at bare land, damaged or waterlogged soils, is our standpoint is very much about taking a positive approach to a rather tricky situation. There will be parcels of land that won't get drilled. The light land's going really nicely at the moment, but even that's got a few odd patches that are going to be a bit tricky. The heavier soil is going to need some major attention. So we're encouraging people not to leave bare land right the way through the summer, wherever possible. It's going to impact structure, soil health, and least of all, we want to be losing any nutrients. So we want to be looking now at how we can actually help you with the careful selection of a cover crop. And it is important to pick the right crop for the right reasons. It'll obviously help with restructuring. It's going to help to retain nutrients and also help you recycle nutrients where previously they might have been locked away at a bit of depth, especially if you're on a no-till system. You'll notice I put there consideration about herbicides that have been applied to previous crops. Obviously, if you've drilled an autumn crop and if it's unfortunately had to come out of action, you might have a residual herbicide on there. So please consider that before you start planning your cover crop requirements. We do look towards legumes as a really good opportunity to help fix nitrogen at this time of year. You've got to bear in mind the performance of a cover crop now is a very different beast to a performance of a cover crop in the autumn. So giving quick growing legumes such as vetch, crimson clover, etc., give it 12 weeks and it will be fixing nitrogen through nodulation. It's a really important point to consider when you're choosing your crop. Thank you. So for us at the moment, we're dealing with lots of queries across the UK with growers looking to sort out bare land. And the first question we ask them is based in two parts. How long do you want the crop to be in the ground for, and what do you wish it to do? This is really important because the timing is critical. Quite a few people at the moment are understandably thinking to manage costs, which we recognise, and will say, well, we'll just chuck some mustard on. Two things for us there. Chucking and throwing seed on into an unprepared or a compacted seed bed is not going to work particularly well. And mustard, whilst it has its place, is a very good club root host and a very poor scavenger of available nutrient. You could spend a little bit more on your seed and get a lot more benefit from it. So for short term, we're looking 3 months. So this could be from May through to June, July. But for most people, we're looking at basically early June through to August, early September. These are the crops that will grow rapidly with long day length, produce a lot of biomass and produce a lot of benefit. But you don't want to be running these for longer than 3 months. So planting these sorts of crops now and hoping they'll last until September, you will run into issues. Thank you, Jen. If you are looking to run from May through to September, this is where the clovers come in and they can be really helpful. A crimson, beseem, red clover, white clover mix will be nodulating within 12 weeks. It'll keep its head down and chug through the growing year without causing too many issues. You won't get any of these running to seed particularly, and you can manage them over a longer period. You may also wish to think about whole crop silage. It's a really useful forage crop and it's a really good useful crop for improving soil structure and fixing nitrogen where you have a legume in the mix. Thank you, Jen. And then finally, for those of you on the really heavy land or running into major problems from flooding and waterlogging, you might want to look at how you might go for a longer term solution. This is where the grass-based mixtures come in, and this is where the legumes really come into play. The first thing to consider is basically looking at how you can use these options and how you can get the best from them. You're going to be spending quite a bit of money on seed, so it's important to recognise where you're going to get the best return for your investment. Thank you, Jen. So, bare land, take every opportunity and make the best of it. Think about the time available, what you're going to do with it, and make the best of it. And for us, this is a really good point to think about countryside stewardship, and I'll elaborate on that in a moment or two. If you are running into regular challenges, countryside stewardship could help. And on the back of that, use your precision farming data to make informed decisions. Within the wider frontier business, we've got SOYL, and we're working really closely with them to help with biomass imagery, yield data, to help you put the right features in the right places for the right reasons. Thank you, Jen. So first up, just to help decision making, and we're very happy to circulate this after the call, but we've got effectively a decision tree specifically focused at the challenges and opportunities ahead. So we can look at individual rotational situations, different scenarios, and start to bring together some options to help improve structure, to help fix nutrients, to help trap nutrients, to bring biomass, to address soil-borne pests. We recognise everybody's situation is different, so we'll work with individual growers to help give them the support. Thank you, Jen. Equally, we've got the additional planning out the scheduling. So this chart here really helps us get a period of sowing and a period of destruction and utilisation. This starts to help you set out the schedule of what you would plant where and how, and it leads on really nicely to the Operation Pollinator seed options. Two of them that Belinda will elaborate on later on, bees and seeds and the green headland mix, can also fit in this spring-summer window. So we'd really encourage you to look at how the Syngenta pollinator options can fit into the system as well, and bring wider development, wider benefit for pollinators and farmland birds. Thank you, Jen. So we're just going to move through now to giving you a bit of perspective on EFAs and stewardship. So thank you, Jen. So obviously we're still in the current regime of the Common Agricultural Policy. Thank you, Jen. And we absolutely must remind everybody about the importance of the cross-compliance guide. We're still bound by basic payment, we're still bound by cross-compliance, and there is some conjecture on farm at the moment that, given the circumstances and the change to the free crop rule this year, and water logging and the wider challenges within the country, that we needn't worry too much about cross-compliance. Make no mistake, cross-compliance is absolutely as critical as ever, and we encourage everybody to ensure you are obeying by the guidance supplied. We've got agri-environment, we've got countryside stewardship, and we've got the arable offer there on display, and I'll talk about some of the options in a moment. And then we've got the productivity scheme, which can help funding for machinery and equipment. Thank you, Jen. It's also important now to recognise the step change we're seeing. It's not just the money coming from the public sector. Many of you will be working with water companies, and we're working closely with a number of them, whereby they're providing support to you as growers with cover crops and agri-environment options as well. Privately funded options, privately supported. And of course, we've got the great work that's been undertaken by Syngenta over the years for Operation Pollinator. So when you are looking at support coming now and going forward, don't just think about what's coming from the civil sector, think about the private sector as well. You'll be pleasantly surprised what's available. Thank you, Jen. So, before I take a deeper dive into some of the countryside stewardship opportunities, it is just worth reflecting on where we are now and where we're heading to. This is a schematic that was provided by DEFRA in the last week or two, and it's quite a useful chart. It's a little bit busy, but I'm just going to focus on 4 key areas within this chart. So Jen, if you could click, thank you. The first important milestone in this chart is 2021, where you'll see the first reductions in direct payments. This is where we start to see BPS payments on the slide and a decline to 0 payment by 2027-28. Thank you, Jen. So you can see very clearly route mapped for everybody that BPS is on its way out. Hopefully everybody recognises that now, but we are surprised by the number of people who are slightly confused by this. We need to start planning for life without the basic payment scheme. This is going to be replaced over time by ELMs, the Environmental Land Management Scheme, and there's been a massive amount of press and coverage on this. You can see it clearly scheduled to start the pilots in 2021. But if we look at the next arrow that comes up, we can see that actually the reality of live agreements and schemes on farm is going to be 2024-25. And if we learn anything from the previous schemes, the reality that a fully fledged, smooth, up and running agreement might not be really there until 25-26. So it's really important, if you're not in agri-environment at the moment, or you're sitting on the fence wondering what's going to happen next, we would strongly recommend that you take a serious look at countryside stewardship. You can see there's 3, 4, 5 years maybe before we get ELMs fully up and running, smoothly operating on farm. We've got 3 more application windows for countryside stewardship, and in a moment I'll spend some time going through some of the key options. Thank you, Jen. So the latest update from DEFRA, Farming for the Future, came through in February. This is the next update from DEFRA to tell us what's going on, where, and how we're getting on with the Ag Bill. But there's some really important information that we've already had, and I'd just like to go through that now. There was a document came through your farm office doors in the autumn, and this is some text that was lifted that came through from DEFRA, and it references ELMs. We want to pay farmers and land managers for providing environmental benefits. The environmental land management approach isn't a subsidy. We must stress that it isn't a subsidy. Those who are awarded ELM agreements will be paid public money in return for providing environmental benefits. And the benefits they'll fund include. Thank you, Jen. So within this is a very clear summary of where ELMs is heading and how you could earn money for delivering these goods. And it covers clean air, reductions in hazards, thriving plants and water, and thriving plants and wildlife, and clean water. Within both those sections, soils were featured very heavily. So don't overlook how important soil management will be going forward. We've got managing climate change and enhancing landscapes, and much of that will be facilitation funding working on a landscape scale. So clear direction and purpose from government in the direction of travel. So if you're not already in agri-environment scheme, we would strongly recommend you give it serious consideration. You could get paid to learn to adopt new techniques and methods to your farming business. Sitting on the fence waiting for the next big thing to come along could see you without a regular revenue while BPS declines for the next 3 to 4 years. Thank you, Jen. So I'm just going to rattle through some key options and some key landmarks. Countryside stewardship for the applications for next year started on the 11th of February. If you wish to apply for an application pack, you must do that by the 31st of May. Even if you don't go ahead with an application, but you're thinking about it, apply for a pack. You must do that by the 31st of May, or you'll have to wait for the next round. Applications need to be in by the 31st of July, and the scheme would start January 2021. Confirmation has come through that schemes will be available in 22 and 23, but why wait when you could get on board this year? There's lots of options and there's lots of detail behind it. I'm just going to focus on some of the key ones now and just skip through some of the key parts of it. So pollen and nectar mix, £511 a hectare, previously £450 or £475 in ELS or HLS, so the payment's gone up a little bit. Establish it within the year of agreement starting, so you could do it after harvest next year. And go for a grass-free mix so you can keep on top of grass weeds. Those of you who had old schemes might have had grass and pollen and nectar. You might have lost it to grass. Grass-free mix is well established, could last you 5 years, and that payment rate looks even more attractive then. Thank you, Jen. AB8, flower-rich margins and plots. A very healthy £539 a hectare. This is taken over from the old field corner management option that you might have had in ELS and HLS. Again, you establish it within the year of the agreement starting, so you could run a crop to harvest and put it in after that. You potentially could roll over existing flower-rich margins or possibly convert existing margins, but that will take some work and planning. The beauty of this option is there's no minimum or maximum area. So if you had a 5 hectare outlying block of land and you wanted to keep things simple, AB8 could be a really good option to look at. Thank you, Jen. Many of you will be used to wild bird food mixtures, and in ELS, HLS, it was one of the most popular options. you'll see a significant increase in the payment to £640 a hectare. Established by the 15th of June, this is one that you must get in the first spring of your agreement and retain until March the following year. Try and work with kale-based mixtures where you can. Not only are they good for farmland birds, they're good for your sporting interests, but they're the best return on investment. A 2-year mix established in 1 year will deliver £1,280 a hectare. There won't be many crops on the farm that will bring that sort of revenue in with all the offshoots that it brings too. Thank you, Jen. If you have when you have the winter bird food option, which is one of the key requirements for the scheme, you can then open it yourself up to supplementary feeding. £632 to pay a mix, to supply a mix of wheat, rape and small seeds from December through to March, April. So for every, say, 10 hectares of winter bird food you are allowed to apply for 5 tonnes of supplementary feed. And anybody on the call who's done this option or is doing this now will recognise what a rewarding option it is. A mixture of feeding on the ground and through dedicated farmland feeders, it's a really good option to go for. Thank you, Jen. So this option's causing a lot of interest. AB15, 2-year sown legume fallow. It's a very healthy payment and it does draw the attention quite quickly. It does come with a bit of a health warning. You've got to be mindful that this mix is a 2-year mix and it will need some management in year 1 and you can cut it. In existing agreements, it's going to be tricky to manage blackgrass in year 2. It's important to know that from 2021 onwards, the option has been amended and you are able to cut from the 1st of March to the 15th of May in the 2nd year. This will make a big difference, but you need to be thinking very carefully about this option before you commit large areas to it. You just need to understand what's involved before committing to it. Thank you, Jen. For those who've got awkward areas of land or looking to support wild game, particularly the bumblebird mix is a really good one to go at. £550 a hectare for a 2-year mix. You get paid that per year. It requires minimal inputs, is simple to establish, is drilled in the autumn, end of August, early September, and is a fantastic habitat for game and farmland birds. It looks really good too and needs very little in terms of inputs. So a really good one for high profile areas near footpaths or buildings and areas where you're looking to encourage wild game. Thank you, Jen. If you've been looking at the 2-year ryegrass option and are not sure about it, you might want to consider GS4, legume and herb-rich swards. It's a reduced payment, but there's a lot more flexibility. You can graze it, you can cut it. The only thing you need to be mindful of is a period of rest, in inverted commas, between the 1st of May and the 31st of July. Setting that ground aside for 5 weeks to enable pollinators to benefit and the sward to diversify. A small constraint for a great opportunity. And if you run this for 3 to 4 years, it'll be a great blackgrass break. It'll recycle nutrients at depth. It'll be a really useful soil improvement tool as well as bringing benefits for game. Thank you, Jen. Winter cover crops. Those of you who've grown green cover crops already may be doing it through EFA, or you might be doing it under your own steam. How about getting paid £114 a hectare for the privilege? It's a really attractive one where you've got fields at risk of soil erosion. So very simple guidance. Sow a quick growing crop, August to September, and destroy in January, February. It could be radish, it could be vetch and rye, it could be westerwolds. There's a huge amount of flexibility. So give that one some thought if you're looking at soil health, direct drilling, and are just starting that journey. Thank you, Jen. So a whistle-stop tour. There will be plenty of questions and we'll pick those up at the end. I'd like to hand over to Belinda now, but just in terms of summary, we're really proud to be working alongside Syngenta. There's a really good synergy between the mixtures that Syngenta are offering and the opportunities through EFA, stewardship and improving the wider farm environment. Over to Belinda.
Hi, well, thank you very much, Richard, and welcome everybody. Just to introduce myself, Belinda Bailey, and I'm the Sustainable Farming Manager for Syngenta. So I manage all the different seed offers that we can bring to growers. It's great to see so many of you on the call, and also nicer to see the better weather that we're having outside now, and hopefully field operations are in full swing and you're managing to catch up. Following on from Richard's presentation, I wanted to just give you a bit of an update and some ideas of opportunities on where you might be able to make the use of these seed offers that are outside the countryside stewardship schemes that are running at the moment. Before I do that and run through these mixtures, I thought I'd just give you a little bit of a background as to why Syngenta, working with partners, are involved in these environmental seed mixtures. Okay, Jen, thank you. In 2014, Syngenta launched 6 commitments to help improve the sustainability of agriculture across the globe. To deliver commitments and to reach our targets over 5 years, we needed to work with many partners, and we needed the support of the growers to help us achieve this on the ground. 2 of those 6 commitments were around the wider environment, improving soil fertility and enhancing the biodiversity across the farmed landscape. As we relied on growers to support Syngenta to reach these targets set, we needed to encourage growers to get involved. Globally, over the last 5 years, we've managed to enhance the biodiversity across 8.3 million hectares of farmed land. That was exceeding the target that we'd set ourselves of 5 million hectares. Here in the UK, we have sown over 2,500 hectares over that 5 years, which has supported biodiversity across 50,000 hectares. When we launched this initiative, we wanted to support growers that weren't perhaps involved in stewardship. It was entry-level, higher-level schemes at that time, by having simple mixtures which were agronomically easier to grow, were flexible, have proof of environmental delivery, and most important was the cost effectiveness side of it. Thank you, Jen. The first mix that we launched back in 2014 was the Operation Pollinator annual flower mix. In partnership with Kings, who helped us to put this bespoke mix together, we managed to plant over 400 hectares in that first year, which was fantastic. The Operation Pollinator annual flower mix is designed to bring many benefits. If we establish in the autumn, we get a nice prolonged flowering from early May through to about September, which provides many different flower species for a wide range of pollinators and other insects. And through monitoring that we've done, we're finding over 30 different bee species making use of these plots. The mix can be sown in the spring, but it sometimes is harder to establish when the ground conditions are drying and you get a protracted length of flowering. So for the benefit of the insects, an autumn sown is a preferable option. If it's sown in the autumn, we sow it around 4 kilos per hectare, and management is very straightforward and simple. You can just broadcast the seed and roll on the surface. Do not drill these seeds to any depth, otherwise you'll find that they will not establish. A very simple mix containing crimson clover, red clover, phacelia, native cornflower, marigold and corn chamomile. A very flexible option. It's annual, can grow up for 2 years if managed, but it gives you the flexibility to rotate it around your farm. It sits very nicely alongside oilseed rape, but also gives you opportunities to use the vibrance of it to help give nice positive messages out to the public by sowing it near footpaths and other attractive areas. Okay, Jen, thank you. After the success of the first year, we then introduced in 2015 a new mix, Bees and Seas, which very much complemented the annual flower mix. This is a spring sown mix, ideal planting sort of May through to mid-July, and provides us a later season pollen and nectar for pollinators and insects, and then goes through as a winter bird feed for farmland birds. With the sowing, it gives us a nice opportunity to provide the insects for farm for game chicks and other birds in that spring summertime, and allows a good canopy for the winter for for game interests. It provides it's compatible with a herbicide if you need to apply, and it fits on a fallow land option of EFA areas as well. Thank you, Jen. Moving on from there, we then started to work with another partner, ASDA. ASDA and ourselves have been running a project for 4 years now, looking at the benefits of green headland mixtures, not only for the biodiversity above ground, but also for soil health benefits as well. The mix we have 2 different mixtures, one with a brassica and one without a brassica species. The mix provides an annual green cover, which can be planted from sort of mid-May onwards. This also fits within an EFA fallow land option. Thank you, Jen. Over the years, we've carried out a lot of the work on mixtures, sweeping the canopy and identifying nearly 90,000 different invertebrates across the 3 years over 6 farms and 85 different sections. A huge number of invertebrates, of which 99 species play some role in sort of pollination, and 143 of those species are a predator or a parasitoid for a crop pest at some stage through their cycle. We've been picking up over 250 different invertebrate species within these crop margins. We've also looked at potential IPM benefits, looking at non-persistent viruses in carrot crops, looking at the benefits of having a margin against not having a margin. Although we've managed to see a reduction in non-persistent virus, unfortunately the 2 years that we've done this work, we haven't had huge aphid numbers. So although we've seen slight reduction, it's been very difficult to actually verify and quantify what we're seeing at the moment. We've also been looking into the crop, looking at the number of pests and predators and the ratios, and what's been really pleasing to see is that these margins are not encouraging pest pressure builds up, and having the number of predators in there are really supporting the support of lowering pest numbers. Growers were encouraged to start with by putting these margins on uncropped potato headlands, but very quickly they saw the benefits, and we started seeing growers putting them around carrot crops, onion crops, and any other sort of unplanted headlands. The benefits they're seeing from the soil side, reduction in runoff, particularly where we get irrigation runoff, protecting water courses as well, and helping just the general soil structure compared to just leaving the soil bare. We also did some green biomass cut downs to look at the nutrient capture as well that we can gain from having these headlands. And we can see there that there's a good benefit of the nutrient capture, that when we then incorporate the green cover back into the soil, we are gaining extra nutrients into the soil. We've had anecdotal evidence from growers that they're following crops going in after a green headland compared to a non-cropped headland has improved establishment, and then through to seeing increased in yields as well. The 2 mixtures that we have, the standard mix is a common vetch, oil radish, buckwheat, phacelia and berseem clover, and the brassica free mix has common vetch, linseed, buckwheat, phacelia, berseem clover and crimson clover as well. If we plant towards the end of June, we just use a standard drill of up to 15 mil in depth and standard row spacings. The seed will be broadcast onto the surface, but drilling is preferable. To get a good quick establishment, a total of 30 kilos of nitrogen is recommended, but I am aware that not many people do that. Weed control also should not be necessary either with this mixture. Okay, Jen, thank you. So really just to summarise on these 4 seed mixtures that we've got, so we're very lucky to be able to bring these through Kings, who take all the sales and do all the deliveries on our behalf, working with this championing of the farmed environment, who also support the work here. The Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust have also been very supportive with the B's and C's mixture specifically, but also all the environmental seed mixtures, and ASDA as well, who've put great investment into the Green Headland project work that we've been doing. All the seed mixtures that are sold are subsidised, some of them up to nearly sort of 50%, and that is all done through Syngenta and their commitment to supporting the sustainable agriculture commitment. All the mixtures, as I said, are available through King's. We will have details on the website and available after this meeting, but all the information's on the Syngenta website with the agronomic details, any Q&A questions that you might have on the seed mixtures, and also our privacy policy, because we do have terms and conditions with these subsidised seeds. So I think really for me that was a quick sort of run through on the different seed options that we have available to you, and I'll pass back to Jen, who will be able to take the questions. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Richard and Belinda. So now we're into kind of a Q&A section. So anyone that has any questions, please do shout them out. Just remember, you might be on mute. So please do, if you're not getting a reaction, unmute, check you're unmuted, please. Who'd like to kick us off?
Jen, just to say, here, sorry, just to say thank you for those people who've written text questions through the presentations. I've tried to respond to those as they've come through. So if anybody's not comfortable speaking now, please just put a text question up and Belinda and I will answer it as quickly as we can for you. Thank you.
Yep, so for anyone that hasn't seen the first question on there, we've had one from Tom Dewars asking if the Bumblebird mix was a 2-year rotational option, which Richard, you've answered in the chat, but would you mind commenting again?
Yep, so Bumblebird 2-year rotational option. So if you sowed it, you would look to sow it August, September, for argument's sake, this summer. You take it through next summer and then it would get destroyed the following summer, and then you're ready to go either following it on with the same crop, or you could move it around the farm accordingly. So you can keep the ground clean, and it's a really simple, straightforward way of getting that mix away.
Thank you. Any other questions from anyone on the call? If I leave it long enough, will anyone feel awkward enough to chip in?
Jen, hi, Tom Dewars. I'll ask another question now. Presumably the bees and seeds seed mixture from Syngenta is compatible with the requirements for the AB16 Bumblebird option?
I'll get that one, Belinda. So it's more suited to AB9, Tom, the winter bird food. They're all spring. It's designed as a spring sown mix, so you'd be putting it in May, June. AB9 you can sow it up to 15th of June, so it's more of a spring sown mix rather than an autumn one. The annual wildflower mix that Belinda mentioned at the start in itself wouldn't match AB16 Bumblebird, but the Bumblebird is basically similar to annual wildflower mix, but with some extra components within it. Within all the options available through Countryside Stewardship, Natural England have moved away from the old days of a very strict prescriptive approach of you must put this mix in at this percentage, and now they offer guidance. So an indicative mix could be, these are the species we would suggest, but generally with Bumblebird it's worth just trying to stick to the pretty much the guidance they've got, because those are the species that will perform well from a autumn planting.
Okay, well that's quite helpful actually, because bees and seeds at £52 a hectare is probably quite a lot cheaper than a lot of the AB9 mixtures that I've seen. Yep.
Oh, well, that's the beauty of the work that, and Belinda, you might give a bit more background, but that's the beauty of the partnership between ourselves and CFE and GWCT and Syngenta. So perhaps Belinda, give a bit more background to that.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think really when we set up these seed mixtures, we were very much actually looking outside of Countryside Stewardship. I know when we started our conversations with the CFE, there was the concern of double funding. So obviously Syngenta supporting the seed costs, and then growers putting them into a scheme where they're being paid by the government already. So the mixtures were very much designed around encouraging growers that perhaps weren't involved in stewardship schemes to have a go on farm, and then hopefully lead to them moving across into stewardship. But obviously now I'm very aware that the mixtures as the schemes, as Richard mentioned, has become slightly more flexible, that then these mixtures do start to fit within the countryside stewardship. So yeah, growers will make the most of that opportunity.
Last question.
Belinda,
Oh,
Jonathan
no.
Drury from Thurlow Estate, just asking if you're contemplating any perennial flowering mixtures, suitable for the AB8 mixes that Richard mentioned.
Haven't done. We have had conversations actually with ASDA with that project, looking at how we can expand what we're doing. We've really enjoyed doing the green headland work. We've worked now and feel we've got as much information from those as possible, and we are looking at other options on opportunities of what might work on farm, and certainly perennial mixtures were discussed within that. So at the moment, nothing, but hopefully we might start looking at something this later on this spring.
I think we had a question from Lucy as well.
Hi, thank you. I'm a lecturer in soil and water management in Harper Adams University. So my question is, I've really struggled trying to keep my teaching as appropriate and accurate in the current situation with Brexit. And one thing I felt when I was reading around ELMs and things was that it was also looking at more of an outcome-based payment, as opposed to being paid to do lots of activities and no one actually really caring if they worked or not. So I was wondering, does anybody know of any kind of activities where things will actually be measured, that there's some sort of idea as to how well these various different mixes work? I understand you would have done your own trials and things, but as they go into wider areas, is there any sort of control, if you like, over how these things have actually been implemented and managed, and then also how they've worked?
Okay, thank you, Lucy. I'll pick that one if that's okay. So really good question. So there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes, and there has been for the last 2 or 3 years within Natural England, looking at how they can develop and deliver this change from, as you may say, previously people might have just done an agreement, tick the box and moved on, to actually making sure that we are helping our growers deliver the public money or the public good for the public money. And a very really good example of this at the moment is work going on within results-based agri-environment, so RBAPs, or payment by results, some people know it as. There's work going on in East Anglia looking at pollen and nectar mixtures and wild birdseed mixtures, and work going on in Yorkshire looking at grassland management for wading, sort of spring summer breeding for wading birds such as curlew, lapwing, etc., and pollen and nectar and wildflower makeup of the sward. And that's very much focused, working with growers within the pilots to really try and test it, and it's going really well. It's quite a big project because you've got multiple dimensions to measure and manage, and at the moment the payment by results work in East Anglia is throwing up some really interesting bits on how to formulate wild bird seed mixtures, how to get the best agronomic benefit, how they'll be scored, how to allow for the extra dimensions of more than just a botanical survey. And probably wild bird seed is the trickiest one to really nail, but they've made some great progress. And certainly up in Yorkshire, the development of farmers self-scoring and certifying themselves with some occasional auditing is building up confidence, building up a really good buy-in from the grower, and they're really pleased with their results. So that engagement with growers is making a big difference. So there's quite a bit more to go, but what's really coming out of that is the importance of advice for growers and that professional advice. And that's the big challenge coming forward, because there won't be enough, greatest respect, Natural England or RPA advisors to support growers themselves. So it will very much revert to the trusted advisor network, as the GWCT refer it to, whereby it could be an agronomist, it could be a FWAG advisor, a King's advisor for argument's sake, who's accredited with Basis Conservation Management or BETA, to be able to support that delivery of advice. So it's a good question. It's a really big part of the piece going forward about how we nurture and support and encourage growers and police it at the same time with a light, soft touch.
I think it's worth just adding there, Jen, that we're also looking at things where we can provide research and information of how systems work, how the individual things work, rather than trying to get to each individual farm, looking at gains that individual farm is doing. Because there's a danger if you do that, that you have to revert everything back to bad before you can get paid to improve things. And what we want to try and get people to understand, or the legislators to understand, is that if someone does a particular action, whether that be minimal tillage, whether that be direct drilling, whether that be putting these environmental mixtures into place, that environmental mixture will supply this amount of gain. Therefore, you don't have to monitor each individual farm that does it, and we don't have to penalise those who've already been doing these good actions to get to a point where we can increase and improve.
Thanks, Mark. We've had another question come through on the chat from Elizabeth asking what is the minimum width for a headland width? Not sure which one of you might like to pick that one up, please.
I can pick that one up. Not sure which seed mixture you're talking about, but I think in general it can be flexible. It needs to fit in with farm equipment that you've got, but I wouldn't go down less than 4 meters. I think sort of 6 meters possibly is better. I think anything sort of narrower than 4 meters, you get such a pitching effect. The crop itself perhaps doesn't establish so well. So I think probably around a minimum of 4, but just fit it in with the equipment that you've got on farm. And I noticed Richard's just putting a message up that obviously depends on the options that you go for. There might be a minimum on those.
I would fully follow on from Belinda in terms of whilst corridor strips are really useful for connectivity of habitats. So if you've got a tree sparrow colony and you want to move onto the farm or move on your farm to somewhere else and help join up, then 4 to 6 meter strips are really good. They do have benefit. They take more management, and there's been a lot of work shown that actually the bigger the plot, the bigger potentially the delivery, subject to the quality of the habitat within that block. The best way to really run it is to have a combination of network of corridor strips and big blocks. That way you're going to get movement of pollinators, ground mammals, birds, etc. Around the farm, linking everything up, and then they've got various hotspots they can drop into, whether it's large pollen and nectar plots for the summer feeding or large wild bird seed mixes for the winter. If you are supplementary feeding for farmland birds as an option, then running your if you had a 6 meter wild bird seed strip that might be a corridor, running your supplementary feed along that and then going to one of your big blocks again will really help that connectivity through the winter months. So really good, just as a pointer for specific details on the options. If you go to the gov.uk website, you can just basically type in the option code into the search engine, and there's a really good dedicated countryside stewardship option page that we're very happy to circulate after today if it's of interest. You just drop the code in and everything is in there online. It will give you all the spec and some of the guidance tips as well. So it's a really good reference point if you are just investigating new options or want some reassurance about a live option now.
Sorry, can I come in there?
Please.
Thank you for that. I was just thinking in terms of the whole thing, and if you're subject to inspection, whether they're very hot on how they measure headlands, certainly the 2 meter by the hedges, and you did allude to cross compliance. And I was just thinking, if sometimes establishing your headlands, things, move a little bit, and it might go down to, if you're trying to establish 6 meters and something might go wrong and you'll get 5.5. And I just wondered, through management and potential penalisation, being penalised rather, that's why that raised that point. But you think it's more flexible than that?
No, it's a good point. You're absolutely right. So it's a good point to raise, the importance of making sure your cross-compliance margins are spot on and thinking about which options are going to be most effective in your system. So if you've got land that's managed by a third-party contractor, or you've got lots of, especially if you've got a veg business on the farm and lots of third-party people coming and going, policing that and managing that access, what's driven on, what's sprayed, what's turned on, can be a nightmare. Equally, if you get everybody on board at the start, then it's everybody's bought in. So if you felt within your agreement that you were looking at that strips could be challenging, either from a public access perspective from next to the village, or everybody driving on it, or abusing the width, then you might say, right, we're going to look at more field-based options. You could do bigger blocks of birdseed, bigger blocks of pollen and nectar mix to get in through the farm wildlife package, and then look at herb-rich swards or 2-year ryegrass legume as field-based options rather than lots of strips. The great thing about countryside stewardship, it's not just an edge of field thing. A lot of people thought with ELS and HLS, I'm just going to do my boundaries, I'm just going to do my awkward corners, my unproductive land. But this is a whole farm opportunity. You can pick and choose the blocks of land you put in. You can pick and choose your options. So yeah, you're quite right. And we would always say, as a general health warning, as you would with cross compliance, is if you go into agri-environment, make sure you've got a 2% buffer of the options. So we would challenge every farm to say you could find 5% on your farm that could go into agri-environment. Generally, some people put more in, some people get away with less. But if you say I'm going to allow for 1 to 2% of a buffer, then if something happens or something gets sprayed off by accident or cultivated out, hopefully there's a bit of breathing space. What we want you to be in a position is when the inspector comes, you want to say, help yourself, not the, oh crikey, the inspector's coming and everybody's running in around in a flap. If you've built some slack into the system, you should be okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Are there any other final questions coming in from anyone on the call?
Hi there, it's Joe here. I've got a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
I've got a question on mid-tier really. But if you've applied for the wildlife offers, can you apply for more in sort of subsequent years? If I imagine there's quite a few farms with plans change this year, so they've maybe got more they want to put into a mid-tier option this year, but they might be already in a wildlife offer. Are you allowed to apply again in the next year for extra?
No. So thanks, Joe. So you basically, once you're in for the 5 years.
Yep.
If you have the land on a separate holding that was not in a scheme, then yes, you could subsequently apply for that next time round. It is a slight drawback.
So on that one holding, it's set on that amount, then, is it?
Set on that amount, yeah.
Okay,
that's
thanks.
a slight drawback with the 5 years, but it does bring a really good point, Joe, in terms of the feedback from our growers at the moment, that everybody who, well, nearly everybody I've spoken to who's had their agreement through that starts this year have gone, I thought I was pretty bold and I thought I put a fair bit in. I wish I'd put more in. I know that's on the back of a very wet winter and a harsh year, but this is why we're really keen to spread the word about stewardship, because a lot of people have been frustrated in the past about paperwork and delayed payments. We absolutely recognise that. But we've also got to recognise the timescale in front of us. And a lot of people have come through a very tricky year. Marginal land is even more marginal, having had a drought last summer and a lot of flooding this winter. So anybody who's in a position of looking for an agreement going forward, do your work with your agronomist, etc. Get your plan, take a breather from it, come back to it and challenge yourself. Could I make more of it? Could I put more in? That will definitely be well worthwhile. And as I say, a lot of growers at the moment wish they had put more in now.
Yeah, cheers for that. No, I think I wish we did as well.
Thanks for the question, Joe. Right.
Richard, Joe, can I just pick up on that? Because if you've got a 400 hectare farm and you put 120 hectares into a scheme, you can still put another scheme in on the other 280 hectares that you've got later on. It's only you can't adjust, you can't put any more options on any parcels that are already in a scheme. But if you've got parcels of land that aren't in a scheme, you can have another scheme. I'm sure that's correct, because I've had Natural England now advising me on where to do my next scheme. So
that's
sure
good to know.
Correct.
Thank you for that.
So we could apply for different parcels this year then, you think?
Yeah,
if they're not included in last
we
year's?
did a wildlife package last year, because the first scheme we did on a contract farm didn't get accepted till June, and then didn't get paid for about 18 months. So we were a bit apprehensive about it. But the online wildlife offer worked very well, but we only did it on about a quarter of the farm. So now we're looking at a full mid-tier package. It is annoying, because there are some options that I'd like to put on parcels that we've already got in a scheme, but we can't do that. However, on parcels that aren't in a scheme, we can set up another agreement on those parcels.
Okay. Well, that's good insight, Tom. What we'll do, not to doubt a moment the points you've raised, and thank you for that. What we'll do, we'll go back to the team and triple check that with RPA, etc. And Jen, if we can think of a way of circulating that as a note around the group afterwards. But thank you for that insight, Tom. That's really helpful.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. Right, I think that is all of the questions that have come in on the chat. Are there any final questions anyone would like to raise? But I appreciate we've kept you here long enough on a lunchtime.
I just have probably quite a loaded question, but one of the aspects I've had to teach over the last while, obviously, is, Brexit is apparently happening, but there's quite a lot of conversations right now to not have Brexit and to extend Brexit negotiations and all that sort of thing, which means we're probably going to go, if that happens, into what CAP 2020 is forecasting. So I don't really have my ear to the ground with policymakers and things, but an awful lot of the progress that we've made with ELMs would be very useful to go into CAP 2020, since there's more control that's going to be given to the member states as to how they actually subsidise farming. So I was wondering, do any of you know, or does anyone else on this session know kind of what might happen if we do end up extending Brexit negotiations, and possibly if we don't leave at all?
So I can probably not answer the question completely, but in terms of just clarity, our current countryside stewardship agreements are EU funded, and it's EU money, and they're ring fenced until the end of countryside stewardship ceases in the final application window of 2023. So if somebody goes into an agreement now, regardless of what happens with Brexit and the timescale, money will be ring fenced from EU funds for countryside stewardship. ELMs will be UK Treasury, and the work that's going on at the moment with results-based agri-environment pilots, which I mentioned earlier in East Anglia and Yorkshire, they are actually UK Treasury money. So there's a slightly tangled web going on there. I think the clear thing for everybody on the call is that money is ring fenced and it's safe. Quite when you see it is another thing, but the money will come from Europe. But where we go going forward, I think UK Treasury will start to get more involved, will be involved in everything that is new after countryside stewardship.
Thank you, Richard. Right, I think I will draw that to a close then. Thank you all very, very much for all of your questions, and thank you, Belinda and Richard, for speaking to us and fielding those questions. If you have joined the call, I will be sending you an online feedback form, and at the bottom of that you can fill in your basis account number to claim some points for this meeting. And if you do have any questions, then please do contact any of us on this call or your local area manager.